And good evening from İLKE Foundation, Istanbul. The Israeli aggression on Gaza and its residents may have temporarily stopped. But what is dismal to this crisis is the ephemeral response of the world community to this crisis. Every few years, when an aggression of Israelis starts on the Gazans, the world community responds to this crisis with the mere shibboleths of condemnation. While these shibboleths of condemnations do not alone suffice to change anything for the Gazans. While everything may have become normal for the whole world after the temporary halt in the attacks of the Israelis, but it is no normal for people who have lost their children, for children who have been left orphaned by this crisis, by people who have lost their homes, by children whose schools and hospitals have been reduced to rubble. İLKE Foundation for Science, Culture and Education has decided to not let this issue die down in smoke. So once again, we have gathered here in Istanbul, and we do have a distinguished panel with us from 4 different countries. Let me introduce them all. We have got US political scientist Norman Finkelstein, who needs no introduction, in fact. He's an American political scientist popularly known as the unequivocal anti-Zionist Jew. He's been unmasking the crimes of apartheid state Israel for many years as a lone voice in face of fierce opposition. Then we have got a very distinguished guest here, Hussain Aruch, who is one of the founders of the Foundation for Human Rights and Freedoms and Humanitarian Relief, popularly known as IHH, a Turkish NGO based in Istanbul. He has managed various international projects for IHH from 1992 until now in more than 100 countries. Oruç, who has served at many senior roles, including as a trustee of the Humanitarian Forum United Kingdom and founding member of UNIV, as well as delegate to United Nations and OIC, is a popular advocate of Palestinian cause all over the world. The third guest who has joined me from UK is Jehan Alfarra, a Palestinian writer and multimedia journalist who covers Middle Eastern affairs and specializes in Palestinian political news and social issues. She is currently affiliated with Middle East Monitor. She has been following the recent crisis in West Bank and Gaza and has interviewed several journalists and residents who managed to survive Israeli aerial raids and bombings. Last from Lahore is joining me Mr. Shahid Iqbal. He's working in development sector for last 20 years. Currently, he's working as a Secretary General of Al Khidmat Foundation Pakistan, one of the largest relief organizations of Pakistan. He has been actively engaged in relief and development activities during all major national and international disasters, including Rohingya and Syrian crisis. So before further delay, and without further delay, I would turn to my panel. So first of all, Jehan, since we don't have Professor Normal with us, so if I request you to, since you have been very closely following up the incidents that have unfolded in Palestine, specifically Gaza, and you know what the people have gone through, and you have even spoken to, because I have had the experience of watching a couple of videos where you were talking to journalists who very hardly and narrowly escaped the bombings, of Israeli planes. So, the floor is yours. If you could share your thoughts about, how events unfolded, how this crisis, we got into, and what is the situation now there?
Yes, thank you. I know I'm supposed to be talking about the experience of Palestinians in Gaza during this recent aggression, but I wasn't there myself. And although I've witnessed, similar sort of bombing campaigns, I've witnessed Gaza-led in 2008, 2009 in Gaza. I can't still really tell you accurately what the latest assault felt like. I can, however, try to relay my own experience, having, family there, and also what I've seen and heard speaking to many Palestinians in Gaza as, they went through it all. But before I do, I think it's important for us to just keep in mind that everybody in Gaza has experienced this before. You know, in 2014, Israel pounded Gaza for over a month and a half, you know, razed entire neighborhoods to the ground. And before that, in 2012 as well, Israel conducted a bombing campaign against Gaza. And before that, in 2008, 2009, that's the one I've witnessed myself. That was also another, 21 days, of bombs falling from the sky, and Israeli troops, invading neighborhoods and leaving a trail of bodies on their way out, and obviously a sea of rubble. But the matter of the fact is, Palestinians in Gaza have by now experienced too much for any human to handle in a lifetime. I was born during the first Intifada, grew up during the second Intifada, and as a child, I was familiar with, checkpoints, Israeli jeeps and tanks, roaming the streets, firing at youth. And then after the withdrawal in 2005, Gaza was locked up and Israel began bombing from the sky instead. And Palestinians have been forced to relive that again and again. And yet every time feels like the first time. I mean, if a missile, lands next door, the fear and the anxiety and the pain are raw. Feeling like you or your loved ones would die, not knowing how to sort of calm your children or assure them that everything is going to be okay. That's, you can't really describe that. But there are also the small details that you will not know unless, you've experienced these kind of bombing campaigns in Gaza, like the Gaza bag, for example, where basically every family gathers all their important documents, their ID papers, their title deeds, and all their valuables in one small bag in case they needed to leave, the house at a moment's notice, just immediately, pick it up and go. Or when you get a phone call and, on your phone it says private number, and, your heart sinks when you see that, because it could easily be an Israeli officer, telling you that your home is next is going to be bombed. And that's a privilege, because not everybody gets a warning like that. Not everybody gets a phone call. And most of those killed actually this month, they were killed overnight in their sleep in their own homes. The prayer gown, which you may have noticed many Palestinian women in Gaza wearing, is because if you wear hijab in your day-to-day, a prayer gown is sort of the fastest thing that you can put on, or even, to sit at home in, standing by in case you get bombed or you have to run and you don't want to be, uncovered, especially if you're, if you're on camera or things like that. But every single person I know in Gaza has been affected by this in one way or another, either the loss of family or friends or teachers or neighbors, or the sort of the loss of property or the loss of earning in business. And if somehow none of those, then you still have the psychological and sort of mental health impact. It takes a toll to not only be, living under siege for nearly 15 years, but to also be subjugated to such level of death and destruction with nowhere to run. My own grandmother this month lost 2 flats that she owned, where she was a landlord, and that was her main source of income. She lost those. Luckily, she managed to survive with her home, even though she had to evacuate that, because there was also sort of fear that it was going, a neighbor's home would be bombed or something like that. So her house would be damaged. But until now, it's been how many years since 2014? There are still buildings that haven't even been rebuilt yet. And still, we are now talking about the reconstruction of Gaza. And while, yes, Palestinians must always look forward, and from day one, actually, since the ceasefire, hundreds of volunteers already came out and, started to clear out the rubble and, defiantly to express that they will rebuild Gaza again and again. But at some point, we have to sort of pause and ask, what is the point of constantly trying to rebuild what Israel destroys? Because, not only is Israel responsible for this destruction that it brought on, which, the world ends up paying to rebuild, but the root causes are still there. The ongoing brutal Israeli military occupation of Palestine, the suffocating siege of Gaza. Gaza can never really prosper if, the people do not have their freedom, and Israeli forces can just bomb Gaza again and again at any time at the expense of Palestinians who live there. So we must, think beyond throwing money at a problem to make it go away, which a lot of people, think I want to help out, which is a good sentiment. Obviously, you want to help out the people who have lost their businesses, lost, their homes. It's a good gesture, but Gaza is not. It's not just some poor place where you want to send aid and end of story. It's not aid that Palestinians really want. They want freedom, so they can prosper, build a viable economy, and we can certainly reconstruct the smashed buildings, but nothing will bring back the lives of the children that were lost, or the memories that are attached to the places that were lost. The photo albums of your childhood that may have been burnt in the bombing, all of that can never be returned to you, and it's something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. So we must actually work harder to raise the real issue, which is the ongoing occupation, to work towards ending all of that, so that we can actually break this vicious cycle, this constant bombing of Gaza that keeps happening again and again. But I think, and I hear, I'm sharing what I've gathered from everyone that I've spoken to, that this time feels somewhat different. Palestinians have been rising up across the occupied territories in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, as well as within the Green Line, so in cities like Haifa and Lod. And the discourse is somewhat shifting. A lot more people are waking up to what's actually really happening in Palestine, and many are speaking up. And I think that's what's giving Palestinians in Gaza, more hope. So, if they see Palestinians in Haifa, for example, or in Jerusalem, or in Hebron, in Bethlehem, all of them out protesting and calling for the same things. There's a verse in the Quran, which I think, is quite fitting to sort of mention it here and maybe end on that. And that is, indeed, with hardship comes ease. Let's remember how all this started. After all, it began in Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem. Israeli occupation authorities trying to expel sort of Palestinian families that lived in those homes for generations. And sort of displace them, basically. But that was accompanied also by Israeli attacks on Palestinian worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. But Palestinians came out to protest everywhere against this. One voice, calling for an end to the occupation, this forcible displacement, the ethnic cleansing. And Gaza took this hit after what's been happening in Jerusalem, and Palestinians are still pushing everywhere, calling for an end to the occupation. So I think that's perhaps the silver lining, if you will, for Palestinians in Gaza, sort of this unified voice, this resistance to the ongoing occupation that has subjugated all Palestinians everywhere for decades. And when you see people waking up to that, we've got, reports coming out, although, there's no real concrete action yet by the international community or any legal action to hold Israel to account. There are, Human Rights Watch, for example, and B'Tselem, which is also an Israeli human rights organization. They came out with the reports and findings describing the apartheid that Israel has been, implementing across, occupied Palestine. So it's a system of apartheid that needs to be torn down. So that's now being recognized as such by, leading human rights organizations. You've got Ireland now, which has recognized Israel's de facto annexation of the West Bank. This is the first EU country to recognize that. You've got public figures in the US coming out to sort of, talk about what's happening to the Palestinians, to sort of also show the Palestinian side of things. So the narrative should not just be dominated by the Israeli narrative. There has to be a voice for the Palestinians to actually talk about the real issue here, which is the occupation, the ongoing occupation of Palestine, the fact that Palestinians are subjugated, they don't have the freedoms, they don't have their rights. And I think those are the core issues that are sort of coming out this time around.
Thank you very much. Actually, while you were talking, you already made mention of it, a very bleak reference to it. And it's very good to hear from a Palestinian or somebody who's very closely following up the issue, that you see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and, this time it's something different. But I would still stress on this point that, when we talk about the response of the world in general and Muslim countries in particular, does it
Yeah.
not seem to us as a sporadic outburst and, a sporadic formal, condemnation stream that comes from all the countries? And after, the real people who are hit are the Palestinians. The real buildings that are surfaced, they are the ones which belong to those Palestinians. But for the world, everything comes to normal after there's a temporary halt in the operations from the apartheid state Israel. So, I mean, do you see that, it has considerably changed? And that is why you do see that silver lining? Or what else do you expect, or do you think that, one should do apart from, just rebuilding? Because, you've already made mention of it, like rebuilding for the sake of what? For the sake of getting bombed again? I mean, obviously that's not the solution. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. Look, if you're talking about world governments, I think they're paying lip service, and you get these condemnations, but no one is actually taking concrete action to hold Israel to account and to stop this. The US is still continuing to support Israel in what they're doing. They're giving them aid in billions, restocking, the Iron Dome, whereas Palestinians are still, under occupation. The attacks in Jerusalem are ongoing. Even after one day after the ceasefire, the next day there was attacks in Al-Aqsa, and the families in Sheikh Jarrah and now also in Silwan in occupied East Jerusalem, they're still facing displacement. They are still at imminent threat of being displaced. But what I'm trying to say here is that the Palestinians, where this hope comes from, is that because the way Israel applies its occupation, it has fragmented the Palestinian population. So you've got the Palestinians in Gaza who are under siege, who are every few years or so are subjected to this sort of bombing campaign where the bombs are falling from the sky. The entire neighborhoods are being razed to the ground. Whereas in the West Bank, you've got the settlements, this network of settlements, the checkpoints, the separation wall, the sort of the experiences of the occupation are different. It's not like the siege. It's not like the bombs from the sky. And at the same time, within the Green Line, the Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship, like in Haifa and in Lod, they are treated like second-class citizens. They may have the freedom to travel. They may have, they are being tried, for example, in Israeli civil courts rather than military courts, like in the West Bank, for example. They have different kinds of rights. But at the end of the day, everybody in Palestine is suffering because of the Israeli policies, the Israeli occupation, the Israeli state, the way the fundamental values that it stands on, where, Palestinians don't have the right to self-determination, only the Jewish people do, which, was stipulated in the nation state law. So, of course, the oppression is ongoing. World leaders aren't really taking real action. Everybody's paying lip service, but Palestinians do want to see that action. But when you see that all these Palestinians, despite this fragmented geography, they're all standing up, they're all protesting. In Haifa and Lod, Palestinians have come out even despite, you had mobs, Jewish mobs of, fellow citizens running in the streets trying to mark Arab homes for targeting by settlers, to be beaten, to be hit, to be this and that. You have a far-right extremist settlers running around chanting death to Arabs. So obviously it's not to say that things are good. On the contrary, things are really, really terrible. Everybody's suffering. Palestinians are dying. Even in the West Bank, people have been shot for protesting what's happening. And like I said, within the Green Line in Haifa and Lod, people are being arrested for, protesting, for standing up to what's happening. But what I am saying is, and this is something that I've gathered from Palestinians, to see all Palestinians are rising against the occupation, and the world is watching. The world is seeing what's happening. Obviously, it gives you hope. It doesn't feel like Gaza is going through this alone. Do you know what I mean? Like previous years, when the West Bank is under, the attacks of the Israeli soldiers or the arrests or the night raids, I feel like this time all Palestinians are feeling all of that in one go. And like I said, Gaza took this hit because of what's been happening in Jerusalem. You know, when Hamas came out and said, you know, if you keep attacking people in Jerusalem praying at Al-Aqsa, then we will do this or that. Then that's what I'm saying. So for the first time, it feels that all Palestinians are rising up in one voice, and there is grassroots change, even though world governments, world leaders still are yet to take real concrete action. And like I said, Ireland just this week, the first EU country to recognize de facto annexation of Palestinian land in the West Bank by Israel. So this is a good step forward, and it's on us, and it's on not just the Palestinians, but world leaders and the people everywhere to keep pushing this, you know, Palestinian narrative, because Palestinians have been dehumanized, especially in the mainstream media, for so long, that now we need to make sure that, you know, it is clear what the source of all of this is. It is the occupation, and that's what must end. That's what world leaders need to try to do. And Palestinians have just to keep resisting, I suppose, and people doing the best they can to sort of raise the issue.
All right, thank you very much. While, you know, it's very dismal to see that Palestine is attacked once again, but at the same time, you know, hearing from you that, you know, it's different this time, and you do see a ray of hope, like, you know, a little laurel there out in the sky. And we hope that, you know, this laurel does become a harbinger of, like, you know, a better future for the Palestinians and the Gazans. Now, with your permission, I would move to my second guest, Hussain Aruch. I mean, I've already introduced him. I mean, obviously, he doesn't need no introduction. He has served in more than 100 countries. Easier said than done, in fact. So, I mean, if I could just request you, I mean, the podium is yours now.
Thank you very much, Ihsan. I hope and I pray this conference will be good support for Palestinian cause. Let me continue from where Jehan have stopped, and with a one memory. Actually, before the Mavi Marmara, in case today is the anniversary of the Mavi Marmara, 31st of the May, 11 years ago, the Israeli army have attacked the Mavi Marmara, and 10 of my friends have been Shahid on Mavi Marmara. It's a very turning point. After this memory where Jehan have stopped, I want to share first this. Before the Mavi Marmara, we have organized a land convoy. Actually, this land convoy have started from the London. They reached Istanbul about 50 cars. From Istanbul, we have added, we are the co-organizer of this land convoy, and almost 1,000 vehicles continue from Istanbul to Gaza, 2009. We hope to reach to Gaza on the anniversary of 2008 of the Gaza war. There was some problems, we late, but it was a very important trip for us. It takes 28 days, and at the end, we have reached Gaza. And we have shared the solidarity of the whole world with the Gazan peoples. On the way, we met with many peoples. One of the Palestinian leader, Ahmed Jibril, he was living in Damascus on that time. He was a very well-known Palestinian, and while we are sitting with him in his home, he said he was a very good man, and he was saying that when we have started armed struggle with Israelis in Lebanon, his father was always saying that it is impossible. You cannot do anything against Israel. If you are alone as a Palestinians, you couldn't succeed anything. Whenever our brothers and sisters from the Islamic world join us, if the Turks came, if the Pakistanis came, if Indonesian, Malaysian, European, all over the world, if the Muslim brothers and sisters come and stand with us, it means there is a hope. In the land convoy, we saw that there is a hope. And Ahmed Jibril, another time, he underlined there is a hope. I think the most important progress of this last 10 years is there is a hope, there is an integration from the whole over the world. This case will continue, and the Palestinians are not alone. The Palestinians is not only the cause of the Palestinians. It is the problem of the whole Islamic world, even the problem of whole world. And we need to focus, and we need to do, even in this panel, from the UK, from the America, from the Pakistan, I am giving too much importance to Pakistan. Now they are becoming very important actor. Hundreds of thousands of people on the street. This time in Pakistan, they are on the street and they are supporting. And demonstration in the West, the huge numbers there are. And these are very important progress. Actually, as a IHH, we are focusing the both part of the Palestinian cause. The one is the advocacy. The second is humanitarian. Both is equally important. If you couldn't promote the Palestinian case in a proper way in the world, only the humanitarian is nothing. As you have mentioned before, they will demolish, they will build again, they will demolish, we will build again. We will do it. And in each time, we will get our part, and we all believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept all these deeds, and we will be honored from all these humanitarian efforts. Also, the advocacy, we are giving too much importance. For the long time, we are working in Turkey to make the Palestinian cause as a state cause. On the recent incidents, all of you have seen that in the parliament, all parliamentarians have signed documents for Palestinians. Now the Palestine is the internal case of the Turkey. It is the internal case of Pakistan. It is internal case of the Westerns even. The first time in the West, hundreds of thousands people was on the street. And also this time, the many decision makers, very important decision makers are talking on favor of the Palestine. From the advocacy side, Palestinian cause is day by day, it is increasing. As I say, today is the anniversary of the Mavi Marmara. It is really very important date. And one of my friends living in the West, he said that just after the Mavi Marmara, he said, you peoples, Muslims, Palestinians, IHH peoples, don't understand the importance of the Mavi Marmara. Before the Mavi Marmara, there was a wall and a definite understanding in the West. Israel right, the Palestinians are wrong. But with Mavi Marmara, you make a gap in this understanding, you make small break in this understanding, and day by day, this small hole will be big and the things will be changed. The Mavi Marmara will change the history, and it is the beginning. In each steps, what we are realizing day by day, this hole is getting bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger, and most important gaining of this victory we have seen in last part of the Ramadan is this. Yes, resistance have made a very good job. Yes, Palestinian peoples have united in Gaza, in Quds, in West Bank, in occupied 48 occupied lands, in diaspora. All the Palestinians have united. All of them is very important step for the Palestinian case, but also this is very important in the West. The supporters of the Israel is losing. This is, alhamdulillah, very important case. I like to remember again the Shahids of the Mavi Marmara and the Ghazis of the Mavi Marmara. We believe they have done a very important job, and they have changed many things in our region. And as Ismail Haniya have said, while he is visiting the Mavi Marmara in Istanbul, Mavi Marmara maybe couldn't reach the Gaza physically, but already reached. And already reached the heart of all the Palestinians, brothers and sisters. They have understand the importance and what the peoples have done in Mavi Marmara. I think it's a very important day to remember after 11 days what Mavi Marmara have succeeded. We didn't stop after Mavi Marmara. We are continue. And on humanitarian side, of course, we will continue. We have a very good office in the Gaza. Actually, we are seeing the whole Palestine is together. We don't make any differences between the Gaza, Quds, or the West Bank, or occupied lands. We need to give the equal importance for all the places, and we need to see the Palestine united. For the Gaza, we have an office. We have a very big office, and we have a huge operation is going on. At least, alhamdulillah, we have 15,000 orphans. Monthly, we are supporting these orphans. For education, we have many projects. In our center, we have training courses daily. And the other projects is continue. Inshallah, after this one. Actually, I don't want to give the figures, what have been demolished in the Gaza, but what can I say? In this short time, effects of this war is more than 2008, 2012, and 2014. That once was long, it was the short, but Israel have demolished the whole infrastructure of the Gaza. The many buildings have been destroyed, and there was no any scale. Even all of you have followed. They have targeted the media. In the live, they have targeted Associated Press and the Al Jazeera building. Not limited with these two, 33 media centers have been targeted by the Israelis during this time. And the effects of this war is more than before. It means we need to work more than before. Now we have focused on reconstruction of the houses, we will do, and reconstruction of the schools. Already one school started, almost for 2,000 students, school started, and rehabilitation of the injured peoples. We have started another projects, and our community mobile kitchen is running. Every day we are giving the prepared food for the peoples on the ground. It is temporary, but reconstruction of the Gaza, we will continue. And for the orphans, we will continue. As before, the Israelis are attacking, but day by day, their power is decreasing and our power is increasing. We will gain. Now the Palestinians done their job. This time, whole world is recognizing the victory of Gazan peoples, victory of the Palestinians. Yes, we lost a lot. We lost more than 200 peoples, and 66 of them is the children, many women. We miss them. This is true. But this time, whole world recognized this word is victory of the Palestinians. Means the things are changing. And maybe the last word I like to share, I was in Mavi Marmara. I have been arrested. I have been jailed. I have been tortured. I have been questioned by the Mossad agents for the long hours. On that time, Netanyahu was prime minister of Israel. And now, inshallah, he is living. And all we believe, the justice will come, and all the peoples responsible for aggression against the Palestinians, the killing against Palestinians, killings against the Mavi Marmara will be accountable on front of the law, and they will be punished. We will see from the Netanyahu first, then the others will come. I want to thank again your organization, İLKE, and yourself to invite us and the part of this. And I want to leave in this point. Maybe we will continue question and answers. Thank you very much, Hussain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oruç. Actually, it's an honor for us indeed to have somebody, a valiant from Mavi Marmara. And, while you were talking about the importance of Mavi Marmara, I could just recall our last panel discussion in which we had a senator from Pakistan. And I was thinking only senior people like you and the senator, they know the nuances of things, while some of the things may be very normal for us, and they may be apparently a failure to us. But actually, they prove, or they can prove to be a coffin, to be a nail in the coffin of Israel, and we do hope so. So, Mr. Senator Shahid Hussain, who was joining us in the last program, he also proposed another flotilla of Muslim countries, or a joint flotilla of several countries to be sent to Palestine, or to be sent to Gaza again. With this remark, we will have questions. Let me tell my viewers that we will be having questions at the end of the session. So, obviously we have talked about this fact that, rebuilding something that has been destroyed, knowing that, it may be destroyed again, is not something, which is very healthy, or it's not something, which we can be happy about. But then on the other side of the coin, there's another fact that there are humans living in Gaza. So whenever there is war, we do need humanitarian relief there. We do need water, food, shelter for people, clothing for people who are living there, who are suffering from war. So we are again honored to have Mr. Shahid Iqbal from Al Khidmat Foundation, Pakistan. And there's another change in the scenario this year, like Jehan was telling us, how on the diplomatic front there has been a change, and the condemnation is not as shibboleth like it used to be before. Similarly, when we talk about relief activities, we earlier used to think that, relief activities are just revolving between Turkey and Gaza, and Turkey and Palestine. But I don't know if I'm correct in saying this, but there apparently has been a change, and there has been a relief. There have been relief activities and support activities which are coming from the far end as well, like from Far East, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh. So countries who are not even recognizing Israel, they are using the NGOs of the countries who do have links in Gaza and Palestine, and through using these channels and links, they are also sending aids. And I think this is also a very healthy thing, which we have observed in these events. So with this note, I would just move to my third panelist, Shahid Iqbal, if he could tell us about the relief activities Al Khidmat is doing, and the need of those relief activities after the war has torn Gaza.
And it was a privilege today for me to have you on this August forum, and I offer my sincere thanks to your organization as well as to yourself as well. So I would just want to enlighten you about a little bit of the Palestinian issue, that what it is placed in the history of Pakistan and in the Pakistan movement. I was just going through some articles that were written about father of the nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And it was amazing that even when Pakistan hasn't got independence, so in these 30 to 40 years of struggle, the Palestinian struggle was on the agenda of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah side by side. And he has even appointed some members of his core team to do all the diplomatic work, and at that time they were in close coordination and in close contact with the Palestinian leadership, especially with the Mufti Azam Palestine. So I want to quote one of his quote, and it is 80 years old quote of founder of the nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and I quote him: "The Muslim will stand solid and will help the Palestinian in every way they can in the brave and just struggle that they are carrying on against all odds. May I send them a message on behalf of my nation of sheer courage and determination in their just cause and struggle, and that I am sure that they will win through. So like it's an 80 to 90 years old quote of a father of the nation. It means that this struggle is gaining momentum, and just Brother Hussain has pointed out that when they were planning all this flotilla, no one can even imagine that once Israel will come for negotiations and for talk with a nation like Turkey, and they will then all these things that have happened after that. So like since inception of Pakistan, after it got independence, Pakistan has, you can say, a solid history of standing for the Palestine cause, and it has just reflected in our latest struggle that our foreign minister have just flew to Turkey and all these things, and he just want to show that the Pakistani nation is with the Palestine cause. And one more thing is that in Pakistan there are a lot of opinions and a lot of people, some are called liberals and some are called religious, but on this single issue, everyone is just on a single page. If they are in the government or in the opposition or in between them, so all these people are on the same page on the Palestinian cause. So you just recently you have interviewed Shahid Hussain, and yesterday our president has talked to him as well on this issue, and he was talking about that we should go for some flotilla-like activity, and we are on board with him, and whatever in the future, inshallah, we all will plan it as well. But there is a great, you have heard that the Human Rights, United Nations Human Rights Council have passed a resolution that was moved by Pakistan, and as you know, it was adopted by the OIC. On behalf of OIC, Pakistan presented that resolution, and it was reported in the international media that the chair and members of that committee, they have a very strong, it was the first time, for example, like they say that there should be an open-ended investigation into the Israeli war crimes. It is the first time that like such a big forums, you know that human rights councils were used in the past for all these, you can say, patchworks for the Western people. So I think that as Sister Jehan and Brother Hussain has pointed out, that this latest episode has many silver linings, and we all should, even your program is, it's like people will get inspiration beside information. Information is all over there. So that's, I just want to say that we all are with the Palestinian people, and our little efforts, although these are not just not a big effort that we are making, but our people in Pakistan, on the first day when these strikes held, we were approached by our donors and well-wishers, and what you are doing in Palestine. And you know that Pakistan has no diplomatic ties with Israel, and our passport has been stamped with a very hard line, you know, that this passport is not valid for travel to Israel. So, but you know that Turkey has become a center for all these humanitarian efforts, whether it is for the Syrian refugees, whether it is for the Rohingya cause. So we contacted our Turkish partners, and just like always, they say that, yes, brothers, we are available. And I especially want to thank them as well. İLKE, as you popularly know them, they were the first one to respond. We are partnering with IHH, we are partnering with Turkish Red Crescent, with Khairat Aid, with the doctors worldwide, and many brothers from Turkish and some of the local partners as well. So the relief activities is going on, and we are entering in the rehabilitation phase. Al-Khidmat Foundation Pakistan has in the first phase allocated $1 million for this cause, and we have signed different relief and development projects for the people of Palestine. It's a humble effort But you know that in such situation, we just want to show that we all are with the Palestinian people. And as you mentioned, and your line is that reconstructing Gaza, I seriously think that reconstructing Gaza needs collaborative efforts of all the stakeholders. And we at Al-Khidmat Foundation are fully committed to provide every possible assistance for this rehabilitation, inshallah. And we will look forward to our big partners like IHH and others, that how we will move further. Thank you very much for your invitation and for such a good forum, for arranging such a good forum. Thank you very much.
So as I've already explained that Professor Dr. Norman Finkelstein, his primary fields of research include the Israeli-Palestinian issue and the politics of Holocaust. He's the author of 10 books that have been translated into 50 foreign editions. Professor Norman, can you hear me?
I hear you fine, thank you.
The floor is yours, please.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on the program today. And I'm going to focus on how the situation in Gaza became Gaza, and then to look at what to expect now and in the reasonably near future. So I want to just go through the history. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but just to set a context. In the 1948 or 47 to 49 war between what became the State of Israel and neighboring Arab states, Israel conquered roughly.
I think that as Sister Jehan
Arab states. Is there a problem hearing me?
I think there's some echo. Please continue.
Okay. In 1947 to 49, in the course of the first Arab-Israeli war, Israel, what became the State of Israel, conquered about 80% of what was called British-mandated Palestine. And there were two areas that didn't come under Israeli control. Those two areas came to be called the West Bank, which was occupied by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip, which came under Egyptian jurisdiction. So 80% of Palestine had fallen under the State of Israel, 20% the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and Gaza fell outside Israeli control, Gaza having, as I said, come under the jurisdiction of Egypt. Now, the second important development in 1948 was, in the course of Israel's creation, they expelled about 90% of the Palestinian Arab population from the area that became Israel. And those 90% who were expelled came to be called the Palestinian refugee question. At that time, it was about, the estimate is about 750,000 Palestinians were expelled. The current figure is now, when you consider descendants of the original expellees, the current figure now is about 5.7 million Palestinian refugees. Now, a large number of those refugees ended up in the West Bank, in refugee camps in the West Bank, and also in refugee camps in Gaza. So as of today, as of now, about 70% of the population of Gaza, about 70%, consists of refugees and children and grandchildren of Palestinian refugees from 1948. Now, I'm going to skip a lot of developments because of time and just get to 1967. In 1967, there was another war between Israel and neighboring Arab states. And in the course of that war, Israel conquered the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So now 100% of what was called British mandated Palestine, 100% was under Israeli control. Of that 100%, 80% was the state of Israel as it was created in 1948, and 20% came to be called the occupied Palestinian territories. And the occupied Palestinian territories comprised the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. So at this point, I want to now again move forward to try to give some sense of how we came to the situation that exists today. In 2006, there were, for the first time, democratic elections held in the occupied Palestinian territories. And as a result of those elections, Hamas, the Islamic movement, it got the majority of votes, and it was the officially elected government now, or at least the officially elected parliament for the Palestinians. Immediately after those elections, which former US President Jimmy Carter, he was one of the observers at the elections, he called them free and fair elections. Immediately after those elections, the United States, or I should say Israel, then the United States, and then the EU, the European Union, they imposed a very brutal blockade on Gaza. In other words, the people of Palestine were punished for having participated in democratic elections and having elected a government that the US and Israel, or Israel and the US, didn't support. And that's the origin of probably the most brutal aspect, no, definitely the most brutal aspect of the situation currently unfolding in Gaza, namely the blockade. In 2007, Israel, the United States, and elements among the Palestinian Authority attempted a coup to overthrow the democratically elected government in Gaza, namely Hamas. Hamas foiled the coup, and at that point, it consolidated its power in Gaza. The reaction of the US and Israel was now to, and the EU, was to tighten the blockade even more. And the blockade of Gaza has been universally condemned as being illegal. It's a form of collective punishment, which is illegal under international law, and as immoral. And in fact, it's a criminal blockade in the literal sense, because as Human Rights Watch, the main human rights organization in the world, as Human Rights Watch pointed out, that the denial of a people of the right to leave and return to their country, the systematic, methodical, and sustained denial of a people the right to leave their country and return to their country, that is, under international law, it's a crime against humanity. So we have right now, as I'm proceeding, I'd like to just enumerate under international law the situation in Gaza. Number one, as I pointed out, a large number of the refugees who were expelled in 1948 or 47 to 49 ended up in Gaza. And now they comprise about, as I said, 70% of the population. The denial of those Palestinians who are refugees in Gaza, the denial of their right to return to their homes in Israel from which they were expelled, that is a crime against humanity under international law. So that's crime against humanity number one. Now, the denial of the right of people in Gaza to freely leave and return to their homeland, namely Gaza, the denial of that right, the denial of freedom of movement, that's a second crime against humanity. Compounding the denial of the right to freely leave and enter Gaza, compounding that is the brutal blockade, which has caused a catastrophic living situation for the people of Gaza. Now, before I proceed, I want to emphasize for your audience what I think to be the most critical factor in this whole situation, the factor which everybody should bear in mind when they hear about Gaza. The fact of the matter is, 1/2 or more of the population of Gaza are children. They are under the ages of 18. So you have approximately a little more, maybe 1,500,000 children who are being blockaded, who are being denied the right of freedom of movement in Gaza. Now, so we have the crime of the expulsion of the refugees, the crime of the blockade, and then we have the crime of the living situation that's been created in Gaza, the living situation of half the population, which is children. Right now, unemployment in Gaza is about 60% in general. Among young people, it's higher. It's about 75%. 80% of the people of Gaza are dependent on humanitarian aid because they're unable to sustain a minimum living standard. 96% of the water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. So now we have compounding the first two crimes, the crime of the expulsion of the Palestinians, a large number of whom ended up in Gaza, compounding the crime of the blockade of Gaza. We have the crime of the living situation or non-living situation that's been imposed upon the people of Gaza. And now, on top of those three crimes being visited upon, inflicted upon the people of Gaza, we have the periodic massacres that Israel launches against the people of Gaza. And so you had in 2008-9 Operation Cast Lead, 2012 Operation Pillar of Defense, 2014, July-August 2014, you had Operation Protective Edge. In those three massacres, I'm not yet up to the present one. Let's just take the third, Operation Protective Edge. During Operation Protective Edge, Israel killed approximately 550 Palestinian children, and it systematically, methodically destroyed 18,000 Palestinian homes. So now you have, on top of the three crimes against humanity I've already described, you have this fourth crime against humanity, namely the systematic massacres that Israel inflicts on the people of Gaza. I would want to also add, and I don't say this cheerfully, I don't say it gleefully, I say it as, in my opinion, as a matter of fact. One has to remember the reality of the situation in Gaza. I've given you a few facts. The fact that it's overwhelmingly a refugee population. The fact that it's overwhelmingly a child population. Let me add a couple of more facts. Gaza is a very small place. So what is the length of Gaza? The length of Gaza is one marathon. For those of you in the audience who have run a marathon a marathon in American measurements, it's 26.2 miles. The length of Gaza is 25 miles. So what does that mean? It means that if you're a good marathon runner, you could do the marathon in about 3 hours. So the whole length of Gaza is a 3-hour run. That's Gaza. It's just a 3-hour run from one end to the other. Its width, well, when I speak to an American audience about its width, I say the biggest park in New York City is called Central Park. Central Park, if you double the size of Central Park, that's the width of Gaza. Gaza is one marathon by 2 Central Parks. And in that one marathon by 2 Central Parks, you have among the most densely populated areas in the world, of whom half, as I've said several times, because I think it's the most significant fact, of which half are children. Half the population of Gaza, children, are confined in an area among the most densely populated in the world, an area the length of a marathon, a 3-hour run for a good marathoner, by 2 Central Parks. That's Gaza. Now, the next fact to add to the picture is it's an overwhelmingly defenseless population. I do not believe it's correct, and I do not believe the evidence supports the fact that Gaza possesses any kind of weaponry or armaments that can be regarded as, in any sense, sophisticated. So what do I mean by that? Let's take the last attack by Israel on Gaza. I'll give you some pieces of information that I think your listeners might be, or the audience might be a little bit surprised to hear from me, or to hear from anybody for that matter. As you recall, at the beginning of the latest Israeli attack on Gaza, there was a lot of talk about the sophistication, the new sophistication, the new technologically sophisticated rockets that were coming out of Gaza. And most people believed it. Is there any truth to that fact? Well, we have basic pieces of information that can either confirm or not confirm that claim. So let me give your listeners or viewers some basic pieces of information. You will recall that at the very beginning of the latest Israeli attack, it was said that Hamas was launching approximately 400 quote-unquote rockets per day. They said it was the most unusual rocket display because of the density, the number of rockets that were being fired. It was also said that Iron Dome, in the first few days, they were saying Iron Dome was not functioning. If you go back and read the newspaper accounts, the journalistic accounts, the first few days it was said Iron Dome was not functioning. It then said, it meaning the state of Israel and its news outlets, it then said that Iron Dome was not equipped to handle such a dense barrage of rockets. Okay? So we have, on the one hand, 400 alleged rockets being fired at Israel. And on the other hand, we have an Iron Dome, which, by Israel's own acknowledgement, was not functioning or was unable to handle such a dense barrage of rockets. That being the case, the logical conclusion must be that there must have been massive damage to civilian infrastructure in Israel. Massive damage. We're talking about 400 rockets per day for the first week, and an Iron Dome that's ineffective. However, when you go and look at the Israeli website, which chronicled on a daily basis the damage to civilian infrastructure being inflicted by Hamas rockets, you get next to nothing. In fact, for the first 6 days, they didn't mention any damage to civilian infrastructure. By the 7th day, they mentioned some damage to some buildings and some vehicles. That's what they wrote. So you have to ask yourself, if you're not brainwashed by the Israeli and the Western media, you have to ask yourself the most obvious question. If hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of alleged rockets are targeting densely populated civilian areas in Israel, because they said the rockets are reaching Jerusalem, the rockets are reaching Tel Aviv, the rockets are reaching Ashkelon. If they were targeting and reaching densely populated areas, surely it's possible, because Israel has a very sophisticated civilian defense system, surely it's possible to explain why there were very few civilian deaths. They were in the bomb shelters. Okay, that's perfectly plausible explanation. But as all of your listeners, all of your viewers know, schools do not go into bomb shelters. Homes do not go into bomb shelters. Government buildings do not go into bomb shelters. So there must have been massive damage, but there wasn't. And then the only reasonable conclusion to draw is they weren't rockets. They were fireworks. These were not rockets. Israel wasn't under existential threat. They were not facing an unprecedented military assault by Hamas's technologically sophisticated armaments and weaponry and rockets. It was all complete, total nonsense. Now you have, among the guests, you have a journalist, as I understand it, who's been to Gaza. Now you ask yourself a simple question, another simple question, a question where you free yourself from all the brainwashing of the media. You ask yourself a simple question. Gaza is such a small place. It's under such close technological surveillance by the state of Israel. In addition, former members of the Palestinian Authority of Fatah who live in Gaza, they all act as spies for the Palestinian Authority and therefore spies for the state of Israel. Ask yourself, ask the journalist, and I would be happy to hear her response. I'm curious. Is it possible, up until the end of the last Israeli massacre in Gaza, there were, according to Israel, there were 4,300 rockets fired at Israel. Now you ask the journalist, is it possible that 4,300 rockets were concealed in the Gaza Strip, that none of the sophisticated Israeli surveillance, electronic surveillance, was able to spot any of it, that none of the thousands and thousands of collaborators with the Palestinian Authority in Gaza had no knowledge of all of these rockets that were hidden, that there were, now Israel says there were all these rocket-making factories in Gaza. Rocket-making factories in Gaza. Where were they? A marathon by 2 Central Parks? Rocket-making factories? And then you ask yourself another simple question. Gaza has been under a hermetically sealed blockade since 2006, and certainly since 2013 after the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Gaza, in Egypt, excuse me, in Egypt. Now you ask yourself, Israel was not only barring anything that may be useful for making weaponry, but anything that Israel calls a dual-use item. A dual-use item means any item which might, in some circumstance, be used to construct a weapon. Where did all the material for 4,300 rockets get into Gaza? How? How did they get in? Where was this miracle that you were able to smuggle into Gaza the material to build in rocket factories 4,300 rockets? And by the way, they say that's only a small percentage of the total number of rockets that Hamas has, because as a result of the ceasefire, it is said that not all the rockets were used during the Israeli assault. Well, when you add up all of these factors, and as I said, I'm perfectly happy to hear what the journalist has to say to inform me, to enlighten me. But when I add up all of those factors, I reach the conclusion there couldn't have been rockets being fired at Israel. There couldn't have been because there was no damage. There couldn't have been because they couldn't have been hidden in Gaza for so long without any alerts to Israeli intelligence. They couldn't have been because there was no material to make real rockets in Gaza. So I said before, I'm not happy, I'm not gleeful to say, but it's still factually the case. The fact of the matter is, Gaza was a totally defenseless, civilian, overwhelmingly child population that this past week, or I should say now 2 weeks ago, came under the fourth brutal assault, first in 2007-8, Operation Cast Lead, 2012 Pillar of Defense, 2014 Protective Edge. I'm leaving aside the several hundred Palestinians who were killed during the Great March of Return by the Israeli snipers who targeted children, journalists, medics, and disabled people who were nowhere near the perimeter fence when they were being targeted by snipers for death and life-enduring injury. I'm leaving that aside. And I'm saying again, 2 weeks ago, it was an utterly defenseless civilian population, overwhelmingly children. And the bottom line is, as you know, the turning point came, as it always does. The turning point came when Israel had to make a decision. The decision was very simple. Either accept the ceasefire or conduct a ground invasion. And Israel decided, because in 2014, during Operation Protective Edge, when 66 Israeli soldiers were killed, during the ground invasion of Gaza, which for Israel is a high number. They decided they weren't going to launch the ground invasion because they didn't want to suffer any combatant deaths. And so what they do to Gaza, what they did to Gaza in 2007-8, in 2012, in 2014, and now again in what they call Operation Guardian of the Walls, or some idiotic title they give it. It's the most cowardly army on God's earth. And I want to repeat that. It is the most cowardly army on God's earth. They're terrified of even one combatant casualty. They just torment and torture, murder and destroy the Gaza and its civilian population by remote control, facing no threat from Gaza, except, and I will grant, there would have been a significant threat had their cowardly army invaded Gaza, because the people of Gaza hate those murderers and torturers so much that I do believe from every child to every great-grandmother, they would relish the prospect of tearing limb by limb these murderers and torturers, these cowardly murderers and torturers who have wrecked and destroyed the lives of this hapless, defenseless people from remote control.
All right, thank you, Professor. It was actually a treat to listen to you, and the way, in a very brief manner, yet comprehensively, you unfolded the way, we have reached at this point in time when we are facing this tragedy of Gaza and Palestine. We would have happily asked questions to our journalist friend, Jehan, but probably she dropped her connection and she's not with us. If she reconnects, we would be asking. I'm afraid we are a little short of time, but if you allow me, we have got some questions, which our viewers have posed to our speakers. First, Professor Norman, we have got a couple of questions for you. With your permission, I would like to ask. The first of them is, you have very comprehensively explained about, all that has happened over time, the timeline of Palestine and Gaza. Knowing this, one of our viewers has asked a question that, there has been a 2018 resolution from ICC that makes the crime of aggression something that can be tried by the ICC. Even if a country is not its member. So do you see that, if anything is pursued against Israel in the ICC, that is going to have any fruitful effects for Palestine?
Well, let me back up a moment. As the representative on your panel from the IHH, the IHH, can tell you, there have been several cases now in the International Criminal Court pertaining to Palestine. And one of those cases was brought by a country called the Comoros, which was the owner of the flagship Mavi Marmara that came under Israeli assault 11 years ago today. That case took many years to wind its way through the International Criminal Court. And the current chief prosecutor, Fatima Bensouda, played an absolutely despicable, disgraceful role in killing that case. It happens, I wrote a book on the subject. It's called I Accuse. And the person I accuse is Fatima Bensouda for the way she handled the case of the peace convoy headed by the Mavi Marmara when it went to Gaza in May 2010. So after many, many appeals and a very lengthy, complex legal process, that case was killed by Fatima Bensouda. At the same time, or more or less at the same time, the state of Palestine, not the Comoros, but the state of Palestine, brought another case before the ICC, and that case is currently pending. Now, as of, you would say, a few months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago now, the ICC chief prosecutor, Fatima Bensouda, gave a green light to investigate Israeli crimes in the West Bank, in particular the settlements, and Israeli crimes in Gaza. At that, when the case was first brought before her, it was primarily Operation Protective Edge that she was going to investigate. Right now, the case is proceeding. I was doubtful, personally, how far it would go in the ICC before the chief prosecutor killed it. But because of some significant developments, which time doesn't allow me to go into now, but in addition, because of what happened in Gaza a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be difficult for the ICC to evade the case. So, leaving aside the crime of aggression and just focusing on the crimes against humanity that Israel has committed in Gaza and the war crime it's committed in the West Bank, namely the settlement enterprise, I think there are reasonable prospects now because of the pressure on the ICC. There are reasonable prospects that the case will proceed. How quickly, I can't say. And I do believe any victory would be useful in a political cause. A legal victory is always useful, but ultimately, it always depends on the will, the coherence, the organization, and the leadership of an oppressed people, how successfully it manages to prevail in the struggle for power.
Thank you very much. To our viewers, I'm afraid because of shortage of time, I would be able to take only one more question. So, I mean, this question I'm posing to you, Mr. Hussain Aruch, since you are among the panelists who has been the closest to the events of Mavi Marmara, which went, to Gaza almost, the flotilla that went almost a decade ago, or maybe more. So recalling, what you went through, and you have personally seen people laying their lives, and even that flotilla, a peaceful aid for the Gazans, was not immune of Israeli violence. Do you still suggest, like our viewers are keen to know, if you still suggest another flotilla? And I mean, do you really think it would be immune of Israeli aggression this time, and it would have any positive impact?
Thank you very much, Ihsan. Before the answer this one, let me say something about the ICC. Actually, as Professor Norman said, it's a very long process. When we applied to courts, even the chief prosecutor, she was thinking that it is an impossible case and this case cannot be continued. In the first reading, she will refuse the case. After a few months, she make her report, and in her report, she openly said that Israel committed crimes against humanity. Willfully, they killed the peoples, and they have committed all the crimes against humanity. But at the end of her report, she said that there is no gravity. That means the killing of the 10 peoples is not enough. If the Israelis have killed 100 peoples, 200 peoples, she will be happy to make this case in ICC. But we have never gave up. We continue, and there is a many firsts in the ICC history. 4 times, chief prosecutor refused the case, and all lawyers have bring the case back to ICC again, and it is pending. It will not finish. Fatou cannot kill the case, or any other prosecutor can kill the case. We will continue, and I'm very hopeful on that. It will take time, but inshallah, they will be accept the case, and it will continue. The world is changing. The Turkey is changing. United States is changing, and now the Fatou also have changed. The new name came, and I believe the ICC case will continue. If we keep ourselves as a united, as a good peoples of the world, ICC need to continue, and they need to be more accountable for the ICC case. For the flotilla, actually, it was a very historical step, and done its job. We bring the peoples, and we have make a very important step. On that time, we have succeeded to remove the siege from the Gaza for more than 2 years. Egyptians and the Israelis opened all the gates for the Gaza. The only gap, only breath on these last 13 years is only 2 years after Mavi Marmara. There was a good time for the Gazan peoples. Actually, just after the flotilla, we have planned the second flotilla, but we are not planning to use the Mavi Marmara again. But the flotillas never stop. Each year, international community, and IHH is member of this committee, we are organizing the boats. Each year, one subject. 1 year, the only women's gun. In another years, another politicians took the boats, not as big as Mavi Marmara boat, not the flotilla, but every year we have organized a boat, and we are keeping these cows warm, and we have never forgot. If we feel it is necessary again, it can be happen. Now the Pakistanis, on the first flotilla, we have only 2 Pakistani citizens. But now, if we invited the peoples from the Pakistan, hundreds of thousands people are ready to come with us. We will see. It is one of the options. Maybe it cannot be flotilla by the sea. Different options can be. But the aim is to support the Palestinian case, not fulfill the peoples, not the good wishes of the peoples. If we feel it will support the people of the Palestine, we will be very happy to organize all kinds of flotilla or land convoys or fly convoys or drone convoys, whatever is necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, we have got a lot of other questions as well as appreciation for all our panelists from our viewers. But I guess because of shortage of time, I would have to call it a day. I would like to individually thank all my panelists, Professor Norman, Hussain Aruch, Shahid Iqbal, and Jehan, who has not been able to join again. I would like to thank my viewers as well. Until we join together, we meet together in a similar event next time. Thank you very much.